Daniel had never expected his life to shrink so quietly. One moment, he had a job, a circle of people to greet every morning, and a routine that kept his days steady. Then, almost without warning, everything changed. The repair shop where he worked closed due to financial trouble, and in a matter of weeks, he found himself packing up the tools he had used for years. His coworkers scattered to new jobs, and the familiar sound of laughter and shared complaints disappeared from his life like a light being switched off. He rented a small apartment in an old building on the quieter side of town. It wasn't terrible, but something about its plain walls and echoing silence made it feel less like a home and more like a waiting room where he wasn't sure what he was waiting for. Days blended together. He tried to keep busy, sending out job applications, repairing old gadgets just to keep his hands moving, but each day, he felt a little more disconnected from the world outside his door. His family called sometimes, but not often. They were busy with their own lives. And Daniel didn't blame them. When he answered, he kept his words short and cheerful, hiding his worries so they wouldn't feel guilty. After the calls ended, the room always felt a little emptier. Next door lived Mrs. Mara Ellery. Though Daniel didn't know her name at first, he only knew there was an elderly woman who lived alone in the house beside his building. She had a small garden, mostly roses and a few herbs, and every morning she spent a few minutes watering them, moving slowly but carefully, as if each leaf mattered. Daniel often saw her from his window but never spoke to her. He wasn't used to talking to neighbors. He wasn't sure he even remembered how to start a conversation anymore. Mrs. Ellery had her own quiet world. Her husband had passed away 3 years earlier, and since then, she had lived alone in the same house they had shared for decades. Her children lived in different cities, checking in when they could, but visits were rare. She kept her days soft and steady morning tea, tending to her plants, reading on the porch, and humming the songs her husband once liked. She didn't expect to become close to the new tenant next door. Still, something about the man she saw through her kitchen window sitting alone, shoulders slumped, rarely leaving his apartment tugged at her attention. It started with small observations. She noticed he often forgot to collect his mail. She noticed the lights in his apartment stayed on late into the night. She noticed that even though he looked like a capable, strong man, there was a heaviness in the way he moved, as if every step took effort. She didn't want to pry, but she also couldn't ignore the quiet sadness she sensed. One late afternoon, a storm rolled into the neighborhood. Dark clouds gathered quickly, and strong winds rushed through the street. Mrs. Ellery, returning from a short walk to the corner store, struggled to hold onto her grocery bags. The wind tugged at them until one slipped from her hand, scattering apples and small items across the sidewalk. Daniel was sitting inside, half listening to the rain tap against his window, when he heard the sharp sound of something falling. He looked outside and saw the elderly woman bending down to gather her groceries, her coat blowing wildly in the wind. For a moment he hesitated. He was used to keeping to himself. But something in him, something soft that had not completely disappeared, urged him to get up. He rushed outside, the storm soaking his shirt in seconds. Without speaking, he crouched down and began picking up the apples rolling toward the street. Mrs. Ellery looked up in surprise, a little startled to see him there. He gave a small, awkward smile. "I'll get these," he said quietly. "Thank you," she replied, her voice gentle but tired. "These winds are stronger than they look." Together, they collected the scattered items. Daniel held the now-filled bag steady while she adjusted her grip. They stood there for a brief moment, both of them slightly out of breath from the wind and the hurry. The rain softened, turning into a light drizzle. "You live next door, don't you?" she asked with a warm but careful smile. "Yes," Daniel answered. "Just moved in a few weeks ago. I thought I saw you now and then." "I'm Mara. Mara Ellery. Mara Ellery." "Daniel." There was a pause. Not uncomfortable, just quiet. They didn't know each other. Yet something about standing there in the soft rain made the moment feel almost familiar. "Well," Mrs. Ellery said, lifting her bag with both hands. "Thank you again. I'm a bit slower than I used to be." "Mrs. Ellery." "You're doing fine," Daniel replied, his tone gentle in a way he hadn't heard himself use in a long time. She gave him a small nod, then turned to head toward her house. Daniel watched her for a moment before going back inside. When he closed the door behind him, the apartment felt a little less heavy. He didn't know why. Maybe helping someone even for a few seconds had reminded him of something he had forgotten about himself. The next morning, he found a small container of homemade cookies on his doorstep with a simple note. "Thank you for the help yesterday. M.E." Daniel picked up the container and read the note twice. His first instinct was to return it, to avoid starting any kind of expectation or habit. He wasn't sure he could handle small talk or friendly gestures. But the fact that someone had thought of him, even briefly, created a warmth he hadn't felt in months. He set the cookies on his kitchen table but didn't open them right away. Instead, he stared at the note again. Such a small thing, he thought. Such a simple act. But it felt as if a window had opened a crack, letting in a little air. In the days that followed, Daniel noticed Mrs. Ellery more often. Not in an intrusive way, just in quiet moments. She watered her plants in the morning. She read on her porch in the afternoon. Sometimes she paused, looked up, and seemed lost in a memory before returning to her book. Daniel found himself wanting to greet her, but stopping before he stepped outside. Something always held him back. Old fears, old doubts. Mrs. Ellery, however, sensed something in the man next door. It wasn't just loneliness. She understood loneliness well. What she sensed in Daniel was a kind of silent struggle. The kind people carried when they no longer believed they mattered. It was something she had once felt deeply herself after her husband passed away. She remembered waking up and wondering what the day was for. She remembered the silence of the house, the long nights, the feeling that she had somehow faded from the world. She didn't want to intrude on Daniel's life, but she also didn't want to ignore her instinct. One late morning, she knocked on his door. Daniel opened it with a surprised expression, as though he wasn't sure he had heard correctly. "Daniel," she said with a soft smile, "I made too much soup today, and I can't possibly finish it alone. Would you like some?" He hesitated. He didn't want to trouble her, and he didn't want her to think he needed charity, but he also didn't want to shut her out. After a second of quiet thought, he nodded. "Sure, thank you." She handed him a warm container and said, "It's a simple recipe, nothing fancy, but it's better shared." He thanked her again, feeling awkward but touched. When he closed the door, he leaned against it for a moment. He hadn't shared a meal with anyone in weeks. And even though this wasn't eating together, it felt close enough to remind him how far he had drifted from everyday human warmth. Over the next few days, their paths crossed more naturally. She asked him small questions, nothing too personal, nothing too heavy. How he liked the neighborhood, what he used to do, whether he needed anything from the store when she walked there. Daniel answered politely, always with a hint of caution, but he didn't avoid her. And slowly, barely noticeable at first, a kind connection began to form. Like two lonely people standing on opposite sides of a quiet street, gently waving hello, without yet crossing over. Neither knew how important the other would become. Neither guessed how their quiet lives would soon change. For now, it was just a beginning. Soft, simple, and fragile. But sometimes, beginnings like these were the ones that mattered most. Daniel had never been the kind of person who opened up easily. Even in the past, when life was better, he had always kept most of his feelings tucked away, sharing only the surface of things. But ever since he met Mrs. Ellery, something in his routine began to soften. It wasn't dramatic or sudden. It was more like gentle ripples spreading across a still pond. Small changes, almost unnoticeable at first, but real. When she knocked on his door the following week asking if he could help her move a small table, he agreed before he even finished thinking about it. The table wasn't heavy, and the task took less than 2 minutes. But after they finished, she asked if he had time for tea. Daniel almost refused out of habit. Then he saw the hopeful warmth in her eyes, not needy, just kind. And he found himself nodding. Inside her house, everything felt peaceful. The living room had soft colors, old framed photos, neatly arranged shelves, and the faint scent of lavender. Daniel felt slightly out of place at first, unsure where to sit or what to say. But Mrs. Ellery made everything feel comfortable, as if she had a quiet gift for easing the tension in a room. They drank tea with small cookies. The conversation began with safe topics: the weather, her garden, and how the neighborhood had changed over the years. She didn't ask anything too personal, and Daniel didn't offer much. But the simple act of sitting across from someone, hearing another voice, and being gently included in someone else's world felt strangely grounding. As days passed, their interactions grew almost natural. Sometimes, she asked for help changing a light bulb. Other times, she left a small plate of homemade bread on his doorstep with a little note. Daniel didn't always know how to respond, but he tried. Once, he returned the empty plate with a small thank you card he had drawn himself because he didn't have actual cards. The drawing was simple, a small rose and his name. When she saw it, she smiled in a way that made Daniel feel like he had given her something valuable. They talked more often. At first, their conversations were short, but little by little they started to share more. One sunny afternoon, she invited him to sit on her porch while she watered her roses. Daniel sat quietly as she tended the plants, humming a soft tune. When she finished, she joined him with 2 glasses of cold lemonade. "You like being quiet, don't you?" she asked gently. Daniel looked at his hands. "I guess so. I'm not great at talking." "That's all right," she said, smiling. "Some people speak more with their silence than others do with a whole paragraph." Her comment surprised him. Few people understood that kind of thing. He didn't answer right away, but something in him relaxed. They spoke about simple matters. She told him how her husband used to build small birdhouses and how she still had one he made years ago. Daniel listened with real interest. He didn't say much about himself, but she didn't seem bothered. She simply took him as he was. One evening, as Daniel was fixing a small lamp in his apartment, he heard a gentle knock. When he opened the door, he found Mrs. Ellery holding a plate of warm muffins. "I made too many again," she said with a soft laugh. "Would you like some?" Daniel nodded, though he felt a little shy. He took the plate and thanked her. She smiled, then paused, studying him quietly. "Are you eating well?" she asked softly. Her tone wasn't judgmental, it was simply caring. Daniel hesitated, unsure how to answer. "I manage," he said finally. "That's good," she replied, though her eyes said she wasn't convinced. "Just remember that your body needs care as much as your mind does." Later that night, Daniel sat alone at his kitchen table, eating one of the muffins. It tasted warm and sweet, but what moved him more was the feeling behind it. Someone had thought of him. Someone had made something with her hands and brought it to his door because she cared. He hadn't felt that in months. The next morning, Daniel saw her struggling to lift a large pot in her garden. Without thinking, he walked over and helped her move it. She thanked him and invited him to sit for a few minutes. "Do you like gardening?" she asked. "I never tried," he admitted. "It is," she said softly. "It helped me a lot after my husband passed." Daniel looked at her with gentle curiosity. She didn't talk about her husband often. He didn't want to pry. "Did gardening make you feel better?" he asked. "Not right away," she said honestly. "But it gave me something to wake up for, something to take care of." Some days, even watering a plant felt like an achievement. Daniel nodded slowly. He understood that feeling more than he expected. After a moment, she looked at him with a thoughtful expression. Everyone needs something to care for. Even a small thing. He didn't answer, but her words lingered with him long after he left her garden. As their quiet friendship grew, Daniel started to share small pieces of his life. Nothing heavy, but enough to create understanding. He told her how he used to fix cars and how he missed the sound of tools clicking together. He told her about the little radio he repaired once and how proud he felt when it crackled back to life. She listened with interest, encouraging him with simple nods and warm comments. "You have a gift," she said once. "You bring things back to life. Not everyone can do that." Daniel felt something tighten in his chest, not with pain but with a kind of gratitude. No one had said anything like that to him in a long time. Their conversations were gentle, but underneath them, something deeper was forming, a sense of trust. One evening, after a long, quiet day, Daniel went for a walk to clear his mind. To his surprise, he saw Mrs. Ellery sitting alone on her porch, her hands folded in her lap as she stared thoughtfully at the fading sky. "You all right?" he asked softly. She smiled at him, though her eyes looked a little distant. "Just thinking." Daniel sat beside her, unsure if she wanted company but also unwilling to leave her alone if she didn't. They sat in comfortable silence until she spoke again. "Do you ever feel like life gets too quiet?" she asked gently. Daniel looked ahead at the dim streetlights. "Every day," he admitted, before he could stop himself. She nodded slowly, as though she understood that feeling well because she did. "I used to be afraid of the quiet," she said. "After my husband passed, the silence felt like a weight. I didn't know how to fill it." "What did you do?" Daniel asked. She looked at him carefully. "I kept going, even when it felt pointless. Eventually, the quiet changed. It didn't go away, but it stopped feeling so heavy." Daniel admired her strength, though he didn't know how to say it. He wondered how she had held on through such loneliness. Over time, their talks shifted from light to meaningful, gently and naturally. And then, on one of those evenings, when they sat together, watching the sky turn a soft shade of purple, Daniel felt an old ache rise inside him. Subtle, but real. Something he had held in for too long. It slipped out of him quietly, almost without his control. "I don't think I'm worth much anymore," he whispered, not looking at her. Mrs. Ellery's hands went still in her lap. Her breath caught softly, but she didn't speak right away. She turned her head slowly to look at him, her eyes full of emotion he couldn't understand yet. He didn't mean to say it. He hadn't planned to. Yet the words hung between them, heavy and trembling. "I'm not worth saving," he added under his breath, as if admitting a truth he'd carried alone for far too long. That was the moment she stared at him still, silent, and almost frozen. Not out of judgment, not out of shock, but out of something far deeper. Something that reached back into her own lonely memories. For the first time, Daniel saw her eyes shine with a quiet pain that wasn't his. It was hers. And in that stillness, the bond between them grew in a way neither of them had expected. When Daniel whispered those quiet, aching words, the world around them seemed to stop. The soft breeze in the evening air continued to move the leaves of the nearby trees. But between Daniel and Mrs. Ellery, everything fell into a deep stillness. She did not speak. She did not reach out. She simply froze, not from fear, but from recognition. Daniel felt embarrassed the moment the words left his mouth. He had not planned to say anything so personal. He lowered his head, wishing he could take the words back. He expected her to quickly change the subject or gently excuse herself. Most people avoided uncomfortable truths. Most people turned away when something felt too heavy. But she didn't move. She just stared at him with soft, trembling eyes. as though he had touched a part of her that she had kept hidden for a very long time. He opened his mouth to apologize, but she lifted her hand slightly, not to stop him, but to show she wasn't upset. Her voice, when it finally came, was quiet. "Those words," she whispered. "I know them." Daniel looked up slowly, confused. She continued to stare ahead at the fading light, her hands clasped together so tightly that her knuckles had turned pale. For a moment, she seemed far away, as though she had drifted into a place only she could see. "I once said the same thing," she continued, her voice barely above a whisper. Daniel's eyes softened. He waited. He didn't ask questions. Somehow, he understood she needed space to speak in her own time. For several seconds, she didn't continue. Her lips pressed together gently, as if she were choosing the right words with great care. Her breath came out slowly, almost shakily. "It was after my husband passed," she said. "The house felt so empty. I woke up every morning to silence, and I went to sleep with silence. Every day felt like a long, quiet tunnel, with no end." Daniel listened, his chest tightening with empathy. "I stopped answering phone calls," she said softly. "I stopped opening the mail. Some days, I didn't even open the curtains. I didn't want to trouble anyone. I didn't want people to worry about me. And I certainly didn't think I was worth the worry." Her eyes grew glossy with remembered sadness. But she didn't cry. She simply looked down at her hands, the way someone looks at a familiar scar. "There was one evening," she said in a gentle, trembling voice, "when I sat right here on this porch. The sun was setting just like today, and I remember whispering those exact words to myself. 'I'm not worth saving.'" Daniel's breath caught. Hearing her repeat his own words so perfectly made him feel both exposed and understood. He had assumed she lived in a calm, stable world. He had not imagined she carried her own quiet wounds. "What happened?" he asked softly, not to pry, only because he needed to know. She smiled a small, sad smile, the kind that came from remembering something painful but meaningful. "A neighbor knocked on my door the next morning," she said. "A woman I barely knew. She had baked too many rolls and thought I might want some. She stood at my door and talked to me about the weather, her kids, her garden, nothing important, nothing deep, but she stayed long enough to remind me that I still belonged to the world." Daniel felt warmth spread through his chest. He understood the value of a small gesture now more than ever. "For months after that," she went on, "she checked on me. Not every day, just enough to remind me I wasn't alone. She probably had no idea how much she helped me. She saved me without ever knowing she did." Her voice softened with gratitude. Daniel could tell the memory brought her both ache and comfort. "And now," she added, turning toward him with a tender, steady gaze, "I look at you and see the same heaviness I once carried, the same quiet struggle, the same belief that you don't matter enough." Daniel's throat tightened. He hadn't expected her to see so much. He hadn't expected anyone to understand at all. "I didn't mean to worry you," he said quietly. "You didn't worry me," she replied. "You reminded me of a part of my life I can't ignore. And you reminded me why I choose to reach out to people, even when I don't know their stories." The sky above them began to shift into deeper shades of blue. A warm light flickered from the windows of nearby houses, yet the air between them remained calm and heavy with truth. "You're not alone, Daniel," she said, her voice firm but gentle. "And you're not beyond help. You're a person who is hurting, just like I once was. And people who are hurting don't need to feel ashamed of it." Daniel looked away, blinking slowly. His heart felt exposed, but in a strange, unexpected way, it also felt lighter. Not healed, not fixed, but lighter, like someone had helped him lift a corner of the weight he carried. "I don't know how to talk about these things," he admitted. "You don't have to," she said kindly. "Not all at once. Sometimes you only need to say a few words. The right person hears them. He let her words settle inside him. They rested there like something warm and steady. For a long time, they sat together in silence. But it was not the heavy silence that Daniel usually felt in his apartment. This silence felt shared, safe, like a pause between two people who understood each other without needing many words. Eventually, Mrs. Ellery stood up slowly and reached for the small blanket she kept folded on her porch chair. She wrapped it around her shoulders and looked down at Daniel with a gentle smile. "Come inside for a moment," she said softly. "I want to show you something." Daniel rose to his feet, curious but calm. He followed her into the warm, soft-lit living room. She walked to a small wooden box on a shelf and opened it carefully. Inside were old letters tied with a thin ribbon, a pair of reading glasses, and a newspaper clipping. She lifted the clipping and handed it to him. "It's from the day my husband retired," she said. There was a little note about how he volunteered at the community center and helped fix old radios for the seniors. He loved repairing things. It made him feel useful. Daniel looked at the clipping, noticing the smiling man holding a toolbox. He felt a gentle ache in his chest, but not an unpleasant one, more like nostalgia for something he never had. "You remind me of him sometimes," she said. "Not because you look like him, but because you fix things when you can, even when your own life feels broken." Daniel looked up, surprised by her words. "I'm not sure I fix much," he murmured. "You do," she said firmly. "You helped me with groceries during the storm. You helped me move furniture. You fix small things around your apartment. And you listen. That is a kind of repair too, giving someone your attention when they need it." He swallowed hard, feeling a quiet softness spreading through him. "You're not someone to give up on," she said. "And you're certainly not someone the world should lose." Daniel didn't know what to say. But something inside him shifted, like a door cracking open after being stuck for years. He looked around her home, the photos, the plants, the small touches of life everywhere, and he realized she had built this warmth again after losing so much. If she could rebuild her world, maybe he could too. Not alone, not all at once, but slowly, carefully. She placed the clipping back into the box and closed it gently. "Thank you for listening," she said softly. "Thank you for telling me," he replied. They stood there for a moment, simply sharing quiet understanding. Then she guided him back toward the door. "Come by tomorrow," she said. "I'm baking bread. And I could use an honest judge." Daniel smiled, small but real. "I will," he said. As he walked back to his apartment, he felt something unusual, a small spark of hope he hadn't felt in months. Not a big, bright spark, but enough to remind him that maybe he wasn't as lost as he thought. And in the house next door, Mrs. Ellery sat on her porch with her blanket wrapped around her shoulders, thinking of the quiet man who had unknowingly echoed her own past pain. She hoped she could help him find the same light she once rediscovered. Because sometimes, two lonely people don't cross paths by accident. Sometimes, the world brings them together so they can help each other find their way back. Daniel woke up the next morning with a feeling he couldn't describe right away. It wasn't excitement exactly, but it was something close, something soft, and unfamiliar. For months he had woken with a heaviness that made each day feel the same. But this morning was different. He remembered the quiet conversation on Mrs. Ellery's porch, the truth she had shared, and the way her words had reached into a part of him he had kept buried. He got dressed, made a simple breakfast, and looked out the window toward her house. The curtains were open. A warm light glowed softly inside. Later that morning, he stepped outside for some fresh air. He didn't plan to visit her right away, but as he walked down the small path beside his apartment, he heard her humming. It was a gentle tune, familiar and calming. He followed the sound to her back garden, where she stood near the baking table she sometimes used outdoors. "There you are," she said with a bright smile, as if she had been expecting him. "Perfect timing. The dough is ready." Daniel smiled slightly. "I said I'd help," he replied. "Well, I said I'd taste it." "Same thing," she said with a soft laugh. They worked together quietly, shaping dough and placing it into pans. The rhythm of it was soothing, something steady and simple. Daniel enjoyed the warmth of the moment. He liked the way she explained recipes, as if they were small stories, telling him which ones her husband used to love and which ones her grandchildren asked for when they visited. After the bread went into the oven, she led him to the porch where 2 chairs waited. She sat carefully, adjusting the blanket on her lap, and glanced at him. "Daniel," she began softly, "I've been thinking about something." He looked at her, ready to listen. "You shared something heavy yesterday," she said gently. "I want you to know I don't expect you to share anything more unless you want to. But I also don't want you to carry everything alone." Daniel lowered his gaze. Her words touched him more deeply than he expected. "I'm just not used to talking about my life," he said quietly. "Not like that." "I understand," she said. "But there is a place you might find helpful. A support group at the community center. I've gone there once in a while. Not regularly, but enough to know it's a safe place to talk or just listen." He stiffened a little, unsure how to respond. "A group?" he repeated softly. "It's not scary," she assured him. "Just people who have felt lost at some point. People who are trying to find their way back." Daniel didn't answer right away. The idea made him nervous. He didn't want to sit in a circle and tell strangers his struggles. But then he remembered how good it felt to simply talk to her. Maybe talking to more people who understood wouldn't be so bad. "You don't have to decide today," she added kindly. "Just think about it. If you ever want to go, I'll go with you." He looked at her and felt a slow warmth growing in his chest. She wasn't pushing him. She was offering him a hand. Steady, gentle, and patient. "Okay," he said after a long moment. She gave a smile, soft, proud, and full of hope. That evening, he thought about the group. His mind argued with itself. One part of him wanted to stay in his quiet world, avoiding new people. But another part, the part that had begun to wake up thanks to her kindness, felt ready to take a small step. The next morning, he knocked on her door. She opened it with a surprised but warm smile. "Do you want to go today?" he asked quietly. Her eyes softened in a way that made him feel understood. "Yes," she said. "I'd be honored to go with you." They walked together through the neighborhood. The community center was only a few blocks away. Daniel felt nervous the entire walk, but having her beside him made the world feel less overwhelming. When they reached the meeting room, he hesitated at the doorway. Inside, a small group of people sat in a circle, talking softly. The leader welcomed them kindly and invited them to join. Daniel kept quiet at first, listening to the stories shared by others, stories of loneliness, worry, lost jobs, lost connections, and quiet struggles that people carried without showing. He didn't speak that day, but he stayed the whole time. And when the meeting ended, he felt something he hadn't felt in a very long time. He felt less alone. Mrs. Ellery looked at him as they walked home. "How was it?" she asked. "I don't know," he answered honestly. "But I think it helped." She nodded. "Helping takes many forms," she said softly. "Sometimes it's simply sitting in a room with others and realizing you're not the only one hurting." Daniel went again the next week, this time without her suggestion. She joined him, sitting beside him quietly, her presence steady and comforting. As weeks passed, Daniel began speaking a little, just small pieces of his story. He talked about losing his job, about feeling disconnected, about the quiet days that had felt too long. The group listened without judgment. Their understanding made him feel safe. And the more he shared, the lighter he felt. Meanwhile, Mrs. Ellery found something new growing inside her too. Being there for Daniel gave her a sense of purpose she hadn't felt in a long time. She had once believed her life had entered its quiet ending, but now she found herself waking with new energy. She baked more often. She watered her plants with a brighter spirit. She even started sharing her own story with the group, hoping it might help someone the same way she once had been helped. Slowly, Daniel began to rebuild his life. He found a part-time job fixing appliances at a small shop nearby. The owner was kind and impressed by Daniel's skill. The simple act of working again made Daniel feel useful, something he hadn't felt in months. One afternoon, he knocked on Mrs. Ellery's door with good news. She beamed with pride. "Of course you are," she said. "I told you bring things back to life." Daniel helped her more often, too. He fixed a lamp she thought was broken forever. He repaired a loose railing on her porch. He even planted new herbs in her garden with her. They spent many evenings talking, laughing softly, or sharing stories. Their quiet friendship grew strong and natural. Months later, the community center held a small gathering to celebrate progress and new beginnings. Daniel stood among the group members, feeling a gentle pride. When he looked across the room, he saw Mrs. Ellery speaking warmly to someone, her smile bright and full of life. And he realized something. She had saved him in quiet, gentle ways. Without ever saying, she was trying to. And he had given her something too, a renewed sense of purpose, a companionship she'd thought she would never feel again. After the gathering ended, they walked home slowly in the soft glow of evening. The sky was warm with shades of orange and gold. "Thank you," Daniel said suddenly. She turned to him, surprised. "For what?" "For seeing me," he said softly. "For helping me when I didn't know how to ask." Her eyes glimmered with emotion. She placed a gentle hand over his. "You saved me too," she whispered. "You brought life back into this house. You reminded me that kindness still matters." We saved each other, Daniel. They stood there in the warm evening light. Two lives that had once felt broken, but now stood stronger because they had found each other. And as they continued walking, side by side, Daniel felt something he hadn't felt in a very long time: hope. Not loud or dramatic, just steady, comforting, like a light that would stay with him through every new day. Sometimes, two people cross paths, not by accident, but because they are meant to gently pull each other back into the world. Daniel and Mrs. Ellery were two such souls, each believing they weren't worth saving, each quietly proving the other wrong. And in the quiet town where they lived, their story became a reminder that even the smallest act of kindness can turn a lonely life into a hopeful one.